I always feel so good about my video setup until I talk to you. Like, man, this is so clean and crisp. And I look next to yours and it's like, oh man, I look like I'm using my webcam. Anyway, Greg Helton, Larimore Production Co. Thanks for joining me today. Did you know this podcast has no name, so I can't even welcome you to it?
That's perfect. That is something that needs to be discovered then. Maybe we'll figure that out today.
I'm honestly hoping for that. I've said this now in the two other interviews I've done. I'm like, this has no name. If you come up with a name while we're talking, please let me know. And so far it hasn't happened. And so God's just going to have to design that name for us. But man, this is like, is this the third podcast we've done together? Because you were on the DadWork podcast and
Yep.
I came on that project you were considering. And now
Yep.
here we are again. So man, and I
Yes,
was,
sir.
for everyone listening, I actually went down to California to almost like be a client, as it were, of the business we're going to talk about today, Larimore Production Co. So I'm really excited to dive into some of the background. So as
Yep.
I was looking into some of your businesses to get ready for this, I saw that you started out as a photographer, but you've been doing video production for the last 12-ish years, it looks like. And I would love to just set the stage on your business journey. So it
Yeah.
looks like you were just trying to make ends meet. Your wife encouraged you to start a photography business. What happens after that? Was it like, "Oh, man, I'm so good at business, everything's working," or, like, what was the step-by-step sort of to get to where you are today, if you can give us the 30,000-foot view?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll try to give a little more context before and do it quickly.
Sure.
Um, so, and we may have talked about this in the past, but for this episode, I'll give this context. I got my degree in materials engineering from a highly touted engineering school in California called Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Um, and my full intent was to go and get an engineering job right out of college. And then a mentor of mine at the end of college, um, worship leading was a big part of what I did. And he mentioned to me, most people graduate college and they go find a job. And after they found the job, then they'll find a church to serve in. He's like, I challenge you to spin that and put it on its head. I want you to go find a church to serve in and then allow God to provide the job. So I ended up going, I wanted to leave California for whatever reason. I just wanted an adventure. And so I went to Austin, Texas, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington. And Austin was more checking out, whereas Portland and Seattle had actual churches that I could jump into. Um, and Portland just felt most like it was the right thing. And that was starting a church from scratch. So I
Mm.
came in as a volunteer worship pastor. Um, there were no real titles. That's just what I give myself. Who knows what leadership would give me? That worship guy who
Yeah.
did everything. Um, but that was that first point in where, so I got there 2008. The economy just crashed. I had no, um, I just had no real network in Portland. And so I didn't get a single interview for an engineering job. And within a month or two, I was like, okay, I've used up my savings. I find that a California pizza kitchen is hiring for a new restaurant they're opening. I've never worked in a restaurant, but I was like, I probably can get a server job if I go to a new restaurant opening. So I start waiting tables and I'm doing the worship stuff pretty much full time as a part time. And I got married in 2010, a couple years later. And my wife was like, "You've always loved photography. What if you started a photography business?" Now, I've always done little entrepreneurial things growing up, but I really had thought that the like linear path of getting an engineering job was the way to make it. And I honestly picked engineering because the I was good at math, good at science, and it was one of the highest paying direct out of a 4-year college degree. So I went when that was off the table, it was just like figuring out, okay, what is this? And I honestly like I had this wrong expectation of God.
Mm.
Um, I kind of assumed so I left two things when I moved to Portland. The first one was the job. Like I was interviewing for an engineering job in LA that would have been pretty good, but I was basically sold that I was going to go here. So I didn't sell myself in that interview. And I think God also didn't want me to have pride in knowing how much they would have offered me. Um, but my assumption was like, all right, God, I'm trusting you. I'm doing this crazy thing that everyone else I know thinks is kind of crazy. Like, I'm going to get there and you're going to give me my dream engineering job. It's high paying. And then the second thing I left is I really longed to find my wife. And I got in this weird phase at the end of college, being in a leadership role with worship. Uh, I found that I was leading girls on, mainly just because I was trying to find like, who could I date? There's so much potential. And so like I realized I wasn't treating that in a healthy way. And I decided like, all right, I'm leaving every girl I know behind with this desire to find my wife. So my idea was like, God, you're going to provide that dream job and the wife, and I expect it within 3 months. You know,
And how'd that work?
um, and it didn't. um, but within a year, um, my wife is a friend of mine from college. She had gotten out of a long-term relationship and was looking for what was next. And she was a friend at this point, and she came up to Portland. And within a year of her moving to Portland, we got married. So when you look at the grand scheme of things, that timeline, he's like, I've got you. It's just not in your crazy timeline.
Amen.
And then I think God probably knew that I wouldn't thrive in a traditional engineering job. And so that's when the photography business started. Um, I mentioned this would be a shorter story, but this is turning into a long story. But at the end of it, how things kind of turned into me doing full-time business on my own. Um, I got to a point where I was basically doing 3 full-time jobs. I was working at the church and volunteering there. This is probably 3 or 4 years in to doing it every week. Um, I was working at the restaurant at least 5 days a week, and then I was doing wedding photography primarily, and portrait photography in the evenings and weekends. And I got to this point where I was like, I am doing nothing well. Like,
Mm.
I'm not enjoying this. Um, and so I went up to the pastor and I know like I need to have a conversation with you. And he came over to my apartment. He comes upstairs, we sit down in the living room. And I don't remember if I was crying or not, but it was very heavy season. And I mentioned to him, I'm like, I feel like something has to give. Is there any way that I can get paid part-time to do what I'm doing for the church? So then I can drop the restaurant thing. I'll do my photography business. I'll do my worship. Um, and it'll just take some weight off. And I, he just goes like, honestly, we just can't afford it. Um, but I want you to step out effective immediately, so that you don't have that stress, and we'll find a way to fill the hole. Which was much quicker process than I was planning for or hoping for. Um, and so that put me full time into these 2 things, the restaurant and the photography. And I think within 6 months, I was able to drop the restaurant as well once I had the energy to invest in the business. Um, and then it was just photography. Um, so I guess from there, we were just about to have our first child. My wife worked full time at Nordstrom, doing customer service. And my business was I started doing video around 2012. So 2 years into my business, just because I could, I had the tools to do so. And I used to create skate videos, and I had a video editing class in high school. And we had this opportunity to move back to San Diego in a house that my grandmother owned and have free rent for a while. And the biggest challenge in Portland, and you're up in Vancouver, so you're going to understand this, is it was gray too much of the year to really do outdoor shoots year round.
Mm.
And I had friends, especially in the wedding industry down here, who were doing 50 weddings a year, shooting year round. It was so much more profitable. And so we just took that opportunity to move. Um, and right around when we moved, it dawned on me a couple things. The first thing was in the wedding industry. So at the time we moved, we were just about to be 30. Um, I realized the average wedding couple hires a photographer who's within 10 years of their age just because they can identify with them, the most. So if the average couple is getting married by 35 to 40, that means that my longevity in this industry is likely going to be 50 years old. I did not make enough money to retire at 50. And so far, I'm about to turn 40. Um, so far, I've kept without having too much gray, and I've kept most of my hair. So maybe I could have gone a little past 50 because I look a little younger. Um, but I just realized the writing was on the wall that that wasn't the long term. So I had to build the business from scratch anyway when I moved back. And so that's when I decided, you know what, I'm going to put all my eggs in the video basket and just go full force with the video production company. And that was 2014.
Okay. So there's something I want to touch on before we go into Lyra more specifically, and that is turning. First of all, like what an incredible thing to have to decide based on the age in an industry. It's like I don't think I've ever heard of a business decision being made because of that. So I think that's really cool. First of all, but turning a hobby. I think I read that like you enjoyed photography and stuff like that. Turning that into a business. I know that like almost everything these days, people seem to want to monetize it. So it's like, oh, you sew? Why don't you make stuff for Etsy? Like, why don't you
Yeah.
make quilts? Why don't you make this? Why don't you make
Yep.
that? And I think that's awesome because like that's how I'm wired. But I think that I've heard that a lot of people, the joy is sucked out of it, and it's probably actually not the right idea for them to monetize their hobby. And so I'm curious how that worked for you to go from like, oh, sweet, I actually have this skill. And then it's like, oh, now it's a business. Was that a smooth
Yeah.
transition?
Yeah. I mean, because I was doing 3 jobs at once, like it was like a slower ramp into it being a business. Um, I think for me, it forced me to do photography a lot. And at that point, it was just a hobby. So I became much better. And honestly, I thought I was much better than I was at the beginning.
Mhm.
And I've talked about this with multiple people. Like, God's given me this unique thing that can be bad, which is I'm overconfident early. And so that gives me the confidence to jump into things that most people would be like, oh man, like too much imposter syndrome, too much like I'm not ready for that. I'm like, oh yeah, I could do that. Um, and then usually it's about 4, 5 years in where I'm go like, oh, I sucked. Like I really wasn't that good. Uh, but I worked my way up. And so I think from the idea of a hobby to a business, for me, obviously, I didn't do it as much just for the joy of it. Like I didn't just go shoot as much. Um, but I was shooting so much more that it honed my skills. So when I did have time to shoot, I was doing it at a much higher level. And that allowed me to um, enjoy it and learn
Hmm.
more.
That's really fascinating. So you didn't wind up going, "Oh, I now hate photography because it's a job." That didn't really happen?
Correct.
Okay. That's
No.
very cool. That's nice, I think, 'cause, yeah, I've been I'm curious what you think about this, actually. This is something I've been chewing on. My wife, she told me the other day, "You're trying to do the impossible," which is combine spiritual things, business things, purpose, meaning, like, I don't know, relational things, and for some reason, I have a very hard time separating business from anything else. And
Mm.
I think part of that is just my personality to go all in, but to be I'll call it a capital T truth seeker, which has led me to Jesus. But in that, I'm like, even in this business right now, podcast editing, I'm like, I will not be editing podcasts for people that have not only views that I don't really agree with, but like are right against my views. I can't imagine listening, editing, being like, oh, here's the reels. It's going to go promote and proclaim what I would
Yeah.
consider not right. And so I'm like, okay, we'll do it for Christian creators. And it's a good marketing thing, I think, because it's niche. But with
Yeah.
DadWork before this, I was like, okay, this is all me, all vulnerability all the time, like all God, all going deep, and it was everything. And I'm still navigating how to juggle all of that. And I wonder for you, having things like a hobby turn into a business is maybe a little version of what I'm talking about here, which is like you're combining a lot of things. Has this
Right.
ever been the case in your life? Have you tried to combine too many things, or does that bring up anything in you? Because honestly, I'm just wrestling it with myself, and I'm wondering if I'm totally alone, and it's okay if
No.
I am. But what does that bring up for you, if anything?
Yeah, no, you're definitely not alone. Um, so I I'm a proverbial podcast starter, do one episode and then never do another. So I've done multiple podcasts at this point. I think like 5. Maybe a couple of them have 3 episodes. I started a podcast maybe 3 or 4 years ago diving into this a little bit. It was called Persisting in Purpose. And it was trying to balance the idea of like vocation and business. How do we as believers find spiritual value within the work that we're doing? Um, and so I think there's multiple facets to what you're asking about. The first side is like just having things tied. Everything needs to be a financial like winner. Um, and I think I don't know if that's like a it's probably a newer thing because, like, my father and my father-in-law and most of the adults that I know from my parents' generation stayed in one job most of their life. And now with the internet age and with YouTube and all these different things, you can learn about so many different opportunities to make money on a consistent basis. And based on how algorithms work, if that interests you at all, you're fed it constantly. And you pair that with some hyperinflation. And so it's more and more difficult to survive. Like, I think what I'm feeling currently is like everything I do needs to have monetary value because I can't afford to spend time not making money. Now, that's not truth, but that's what I'm being fed.
Yes.
Um, and that's what I feel constantly. And I think there's this other level. And I think we discussed this a little bit in the past. You know, John Mark Comer has the book Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Um, and I just listened to his most recent book. Yeah, there you go. I listened to his most recent book and I honestly can't remember what it was called. It's like Following the Way of Jesus or something to that extent. But one of the things in both books that I'm reminded of is that we're limited beings, but we're always in pursuit of being limitless. And so, anyone like me who's a serial entrepreneur, and it seems like that's you as well, is kind of naturally wired to think through how anything could be viable. Um, and so, if I'm going to invest my time in it, it needs to either be worth my time financially or it needs to be worth my time spiritually, or maybe there's some sort of intersect, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's easy to evaluate things through that lens. And then the opposite, or not necessarily opposite, but the other side of it is I have a unique, or maybe not unique perspective, but I have a struggle coming from being a volunteer worship pastor with having finances tied to vocational ministry.
Right.
And, you know, there was a book by Francis Chan called Letters to the Church. And that book is all about when he left the mega church that he started. and he started this house church movement up in the San Francisco area. And the model of that church is to have a pastor. So he started, and he brought, I believe, 2 people under him to be disciples, that they would start a house church and they would be discipling pastors along with him. And as the church grew and they needed to expand, those guys would go start new churches in houses, and they would bring community in, and they would disciple 2 more people. And none of them were actually paid by the church. They were all full-time in some other job. Now, I believe that our world is too broad. The church is so diverse that I don't believe that that's necessarily the best thing for all churches. I think there's a reason why we have so many different types of churches. Um, but I do see the value in when your monetary income is tied to your vocational ministry, it causes these weird tensions in you where you're starting to like question authority, question the church, question God, because like, man, I'm struggling to make it by. Why aren't you providing more?
Yes.
And when you're trusting the Lord to provide through means that you're actually doing with your own hands, and you're doing ministry on the side, for me personally, that's a much healthier balance. Which is one of the reasons why, like, I don't work for churches. Like, I know a lot of Christian video people, like, they'll do video and one of their clients will be a church and stuff. And it's like, I don't want to play that dance of like, what's the right monetary amount for a church to
Yes.
pay me? What discount should I be doing? Like, how much of this is ministry versus business? Like, it's an awkward dance that I knew that I couldn't handle in a healthy way. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's kind of how I experienced those things.
That's very wise. And I think I experienced that with DadWork because I started it as a business. I started it as an Instagram page, and then it
Yep.
became a business. And then I became a Christian. And then I was like, now what? And I was learning everything on the fly in public while trying to manage these groups that I had started, while trying to coach guys. And that was hectic. And by the end of it, for many reasons, not just that I was trying to both do the God's work that I thought he had me doing, plus the financial side of things, but my personality at the time, um, even less humbled than it is today, was carrying all this weight and kept going, well, if God wants me to do this, then why I can't charge for it. But these guys won't do this work if I don't charge them for it, and they need the buy-in, and I'm not reaching people. And so it became this thing that was very unhealthy, and that's, I
Mhm.
think now looking back, a huge reason why God was so gracious to me to let me step away from that, even though it still doesn't really make sense, because now I'm having to start all over again. But yeah, what you just said there about having the opportunity to almost serve separately without any of that intermixing, it's almost like, it's almost like a spiritual safeguard, like when pastors meet with young women out in public or with someone else. And it's a kind of a weird example, but there's no chance then for anything untoward to happen. Whereas, as you're saying about like mixing these two things, I've experienced the discomfort of that. And it sounds like you know that that would be uncomfortable for you too. And so, yeah, I'm actually glad that my first number of clients have been coaches. They happen to be Christians.
Mm.
They happen to be coaches and entrepreneurs, but I thought it was going to be churches and ministries that wanted what we
Yeah.
were doing. And now that you say that, I'm actually grateful that it hasn't worked out that way. So anyway, again, this is not necessarily knowable in a quick chat, but that helped me to just think through it.
Mm.
Anything else on this before I ask you another question?
No, I mean, I'm sure there's multiple areas we could go with that, but
Yeah. Okay. Well, if
yeah.
there's nothing burning, then I'll carry on because I also want to get into the business part of things, and I'm going to get into the
Yeah.
business part of things by um, asking you to reveal whether or not this is marketing speak. Okay, so I listened to it, or I looked at another interview that you did like, I don't know, 3, 4 years ago. And you said that videos sort of allow you to tell stories on a more complete level. And it's like, that's sort of why I think you were saying that this was what the business was versus just photography. And I'm like, that's probably true. But how much of that is marketing speak versus how much of this is like, I genuinely love the videos and the creative side of things. And I guess the core of the question is like, do you genuinely go to work going like, I love videos and creativity? Or is this like something that you've almost had to cultivate so that you get excited about the work? And does that even matter?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's a mix. First of all, I do like that is somewhat marketing speak, but I do believe that I was a musician. And again, I thought I was better than I actually am. Um, um, but I did music and that was a big part of my life. And literally, I thought at one point that I would be a worship pastor as my career as well. Um, I'm glad it didn't go that way, but you get to pair music, which drives emotion. You get to do different kinds of storytelling. And so, like, one of my favorite types of stories to tell is a collective narrative. So, interviewing a bunch of people to tell one cohesive story.
Mm.
Um, and so, by using interviews, so you have that other audio component, and then you add in visuals, which you have your A cam, which is what we're doing, like the talking portion. And then you have your B roll, which is that secondary footage that helps tell the story in a more visually compelling way. And so that's what I mean when I say um, that it is a better medium for storytelling and why I like it. When it comes to actually enjoying it, it's a whole mix, right? Like, I think in the early stages of any business, especially like if you put it into perspective, I have a brand new baby. I don't have rent, but I still live in California. Um, like, I think the first year we moved here, I made $40,000, um, which was a decade ago, barely making it by, like barely scraping by. So giving that perspective, like you end up taking whatever you can get, right? So there were projects that I was working on that I didn't enjoy. And I always tried to do passion projects. And I think in the world of video production, that's one of my big recommendations for any young aspiring video producer is to actually do passion projects, create the work that you want to create and showcase that because you're always going to create stuff that's more compelling than what your client may ask for. And then keep leveraging that to get the next client, keep leveraging the client project to get the next opportunity to level up your personal projects. And you use that to grow. And that only works for a certain time, at least for me. At the certain point, you get too busy to invest in those passion projects, and then it's more just doing the work. Um, but like there have been projects that aren't as exciting, and that's where, as a follower of Jesus, it's about the people for me. So, like, if you have a project that's not interesting and the people are really challenging, like that's a solid mix for just being miserable. But if you can really invest in the people, um, you may not be like, oh man, I'm excited to edit this video. Whether it's just like super informational, or maybe it talks about a subject that you just neither understand nor would invest the time personally to seek out. Um, but like there's different clients that I love working with because I've deeply invested in the people within those companies, and have quite honestly become sort of a pseudo psychiatrist for many of my clients over the years.
Yeah, well, I can
Um,
see why. Having sat with you, I mean, I felt like I was being just X-ray visioned into my soul when I was sitting there with you, and you did an amazing job of asking these right questions, man. So I can see why that would be the case for sure.
And so for any business owners who may listen to this, who have employees, uh, the biggest thing I know from working with so many different people who aren't business owners, like the creative directors, marketing directors, all those different roles, is they're all overworked. Like, if you can find more ways to give your team work-life balance, do it. Like, I know everything often tends to be about profit, but even, I have one employee and I had one employee before him. Um, and I do as much as I can to give them the schedule that they need. So, like, for me, that's 8 to 4. For my current employee, he does Monday from 7 until noon. He does 3 10-hour days. And then on Friday, he does 7 to noon because his wife is doing her PhD and needs time to work and they don't have childcare. And so, like, I don't think, other than like a film day, there's random film days that are like a 12-hour day. And I typically try to compensate when I had an employee who would film with me. I would compensate by giving them half the day off the next day or whatever. But I don't know if I've ever made someone work overtime
Hmm.
because I have that high of a value for people to have a healthy work-life balance. And that's the one thing I see. I know this is a tangent, but if anyone's listening, like, truly care about your employees because they are burnt out. And I think that's why so many are jumping to other companies, is because they just can't handle the burden,
Hmm.
and the finances, honestly, in this economy don't cover what they need anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a huge aside. Let me know if there's a place you want me to pick back up, or
I would like to know about, the business itself, where it is
yeah,
now, because it's been 12 years by the sounds of it.
yeah.
That's a long time, and so, when you look at the business, has
Mhm.
there I guess, what's your hope for the business? Because when I look at things, my brain always goes like, "Let's go to the moon." Like, "How do I make this go to the moon?" And more recently,
Mhm.
I've been like, "What would enough look like?" And I know that's the classic question that we're all supposed to be asking at some point.
For
But
sure.
how have you looked at this, and how has the business progressed? Because you have one employee.
Mhm.
Could you have more? Have you ever had more? Where is the business at today? Like, what does this look like for you now as a business? Is it
Yeah.
just like we're making enough, we're good, or are you still trying to grow? Like, what is the dynamic of you as an entrepreneur today, as you sit with this now medium, moderately mature business?
Right. Yeah. So technically, I've been doing video for about 12 years. Um, June 2000, or no, I guess February 2010, or sorry, 2014. I'm getting all my dates mixed up. February 2014 and was when we moved to San Diego. And that's when I made that decision to make the full switch. So that's kind of
Right.
where I really consider it. So that's more like a decade. Um, and then we had a different brand that got a cease and desist at one point for our name and changed it to Larimore. I think that was 2015 is when it switched to Larimore. Um, that was fun. That's a story for another day. Um, but yeah, so when I started, it was just survival. Like, God, these are the gifts that you've given me. I don't see any other thing that I should be doing. Now, granted, for the first 4 years, like, I'd be on LinkedIn jobs or Indeed or something every other month, um, just seeing what other full-time jobs were out there just because I was stressed.
Yeah.
Um, and I think when I got to the point of having less stress with the business was when I treated it more and more like a company. There was a book called Profit First by Mike Michalowicz that basically approaches business through a plate system, kind of similar to Dave Ramsey, but having multiple bank accounts and really having a clear picture of what your finances are rather than you have this one big pot of money. So let's say you finish a $20,000 project. You're like, I can go do extra dinners this month. I can do this. And so when I split things up according to percentages and recognize what I actually need to pay my or make revenue wise to actually pay what I need. And then when I gave myself a set salary so that I could have a set budget, that drastically changed stress for us. And then add on to that, we don't go full Dave Ramsey. We didn't do the cash envelope system or anything like that. But one thing that was super valuable is we set up a emergency fund, and that's one of his big things. And we were able to get the emergency fund up to $25,000. And for us, that was like, that could cover us maybe at that point 4 to 6 months. So if no business comes in, I have 4 to 6 months to figure out what to do. And now at this point, I have my personal savings emergency fund and I have a business emergency fund. So it's like, all right, I can pay my employees. And if I can't pay myself, I can still pay my employees, but I can pay myself from the emergency fund. So that's when I really started approaching it like a business. But this business, I personally have not found a way to scale this company. So to give you some numbers, like I have scaled it revenue wise and I have scaled my income. But the last 3 years, I really haven't scaled my income, even though the revenue, I think I'd have to look back at my actual finances, but I believe revenue 3 years ago was somewhere in the 150,000, something like that. This last year was 320, 350, couple $100,000 jump. And I'm paying myself no different than I was 3 years ago. And there's multiple reasons for that. Just because the revenue is over 3 doesn't mean that the projects were profitable. For example, we had the biggest commercial campaign we had done, like single primary video we produced for a travel agency. And it was like a $68,000 project. And it was $33,000 in hard cost overhead, where I'll have certain $20,000 projects that are $2,000 of overhead.
Right.
So depending on the kinds of projects you want, they require much more outside help and require a lot more to scale. And I think the other reason why it hasn't been able to scale is because I've really enjoyed doing work in different spaces and not really niching down. And, I say niche, some people say niche. I know the phrase riches are in the niches.
Hey, I'm Canadian. We say niche, so that's music to my ears.
There you go. Maybe we'll call it riches are in the niches.
Dude, I have said that in my head so many times. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? This doesn't even rhyme. And so I've started saying that.
But I think the only way to scale this company is, I guess there's a couple. Number one is actually work yourself out of the business. I'm too involved in too many facets of the company to truly scale it. Number two is really niche down and choose an area that you can just dominate so that your value proposition and what value you bring is so much higher than any other production company in that specific sector. I would say those are the two primary things. But at this point, I won't go too far into this conversation. And I know you have context of this, but some of these are reasons for why we're going to sell our house in San Diego and we're going to move all the way to the East Coast to Raleigh, North Carolina, is we're trying to, like, I've had to have my foot down on the gas for the last decade since having kids. Next week is my oldest daughter's 10th birthday. Um, I've had to have the foot on the gas for so long that I haven't really felt like I've had the space to step back and really analyze, like, what do I want to be doing for the next decade, for the next 20 years? How can I buy more of my time back with my family? And, we're both a part of a mastermind called Integrated, which is all about integrating faith, family, and business. And how can I do that on a more deep level? And so right now we are house rich and cash poor. Uh, and we're not literally poor, like we have plenty of money in the bank, like I discussed. Um, but like what you're doing right now, which is like shutting something down and trusting God to go full bore in another direction. Like, I don't have much leeway. It's probably 3, 4, maybe 5, 6 months at the best if I did that. Um, but I have an employee who I need to cover and I take care of his family. So it's not as simple. By selling our house, I can put a sizable down payment on more of our dream home in Raleigh, North Carolina. And one of the big things that we want, so we have a 1,400 square foot house with 3 children in it. And I've been a huge advocate for just making it work. There's so many people who make it work. And I don't want to be this overprivileged person who's like, I need to have more, the American ideal. But one of the things that God's really laid on our hearts is we want our home to be a house of community. We want to be a home where our children are dying to bring their friends, that we can have our neighbors over more easily and host multiple families at a time, where we can have people stay with us if we need to. And, we adopted our son and we'll pray about potentially adopting or fostering again, where we could actually have the space to do that. And we just couldn't figure out how to, what's the word? Not, I guess, reasonably, but I guess safely do that in San Diego without needing to make a lot more and likely add both stress and time to the me working, or have my wife have to work, which is something that we've worked hard to not have her do. And so currently where we're at is planning to put our house on the market at the end of next month, sell our house, um, and hopefully have over 100, if not a couple $100,000 in liquid assets to give us the ability to really like take the foot off the gas and recognize, I think, but I started another company, a golf company selling putters, which we should hopefully be able to do the full launch. There's been so many things blocking it uh, in the next 5 weeks. But be able to go like, how can I actually invest in that company the way I need to? I have multiple YouTube channels that could be something. Like, how do I invest in those and maybe turn that into something where I can bring the family and business a little more integrated? Um, and so while I probably could figure out a way to scale this video production company, and I'm still working towards that end, I'm not ending this video production company. Jacob, my video editor, if you're watching this, I'm not ending the company. Let's be clear with that. But I want to find what is that balance of using all these skill sets, specifically in marketing, that God has equipped me with, and put that in some different avenues and see if it's more scalable to create a greater impact. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of my vision of scale.
That was really good, man. And I think the thing that I'm enjoying more and more about this particular set of conversations, this podcast, is that this was the missing piece. Like when I'm listening to business podcasts, they're all secular and nobody's going like, how do I integrate my family? How do I make sure I have time and
Right.
space to do what God is calling me to do? And I resonate so strong with taking that foot off the gas to be able to notice, because I think one of the enemy's greatest weapons right now is distraction. He doesn't even need to hit us if we are out of the game entirely anyway. And so to
Yeah.
find a way, a creative way to build a business which is profitable and serving your family and the community and employees, while also doing what God wants you to do with your family and with the kingdom, that's why I started this. Like this has given me so much joy and gratitude listening to this and just going like, yeah, this is what. And again, like I'm not being prescriptive, but I think this is what I need to hear. Maybe this is what other people need to hear, because it's hard. And the amount of people I've talked to who are like, "Oh, I didn't know you could just stop something." With my story, like 6, 7
Mhm.
people have reached out to me. I've gone, I've been feeling like this too. I didn't know he could just stop. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, if God's calling you to do that and you trust him, then I don't know why not, because it has to end in order for something else to begin. So I don't know. I'm just grateful that you shared that. So thank you. But what are you
Yeah.
going to do with employee there? You're moving across the country. Are you keeping your location there? Are you just
Yeah.
moving everything? Where's your employee going to go? What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's something that we are navigating right now. Um, and I think like the two biggest challenges that we currently have with this move, um, number one is the employee, is how do I make sure to provide for him while we move? And so we've already been working on systems so that he can work remotely, and that's super good. But then just making sure that we have enough business coming in. And something that I have even considered, so we have multiple clients. I wouldn't call them retainer clients, but we work with them every month for the last 6, 7 years. So like I
Sure.
don't have them on a set budget. It's just based on the work they need to do. Between the two we have that would continue on once I move, that would cover operating the business and him and maybe me a little bit. So there's a little bit of me who's curious, like, what if we get there, we get in our house? Because my second anxiety right now is that moving the business is going to make a challenge for getting the loan that we want. Um, we want to take, not a crazy loan, like about 400,000. Um, and we're still putting in a decent amount of equity and cash into the home, but that gives us that flexibility to have hopefully a couple hundred K. I don't want to just pour all that cash back in, have a super low mortgage, but not have flexibility.
Yeah.
Um, so my desire or my idea is like, what if I was just like, okay, I can manage those two clients with probably one, maybe 2 days a week at most, um, and pay him full time, cover the cost to run the business, and then just put 90% of my effort outside of that into these multiple businesses, which is my golf brand. Um, I have a smaller YouTube channel that's about video production that's like 1,300 subscribers. And for 1,300 subscribers, it makes about $80 a month, which isn't much. But I know if I could put some fuel on that fire and be creative on that side of the business, um, being a decade into running a production company, I think there's a lot of value I could bring. Um, and then I have this family YouTube channel, which the original intent was to go to all 50 states in 100 days this summer, which we brought back. And this summer was going to be 24 states in 36 days. And we were going to break it up over 3 summers. But now with the move, we decided to put that on pause. Um, but one of the videos I'm most excited for that channel that I think could help get its boost, because it's gotten no organic growth at this point, is to create a video saying we're leaving California. and then start creating some content literally about some of this conversation of
Yeah.
why it makes sense to make a big move and do something that lots of people dream about, especially in expensive places like Southern California, British Columbia, uh, you know, Seattle, New York City, like all these like, man, I can't take my foot off the gas here, but what would it look like if I just completely changed things and allowed myself to build in some of these more healthier rhythms that slow things down? Um, and so we are deciding to make a sacrifice that will cost us. My parents live 10 minutes from me. My wife's live 20 minutes from us.
Mm.
Um, my sister, brother-in-law, and their 3 kids are here. And there's a lot of different things that we're leaving behind. Um, but we know what this is for our family, at least in this season. And the opportunity to do that and invest in these other companies is going to be pretty incredible. So that kind of shifted. So, like, currently, I have a lease in my studio, which I'm sitting in right now through the end of the year. I'll try to see if I can lease it out, have someone take over my lease just so I don't have that burden. I currently rent it out to other production companies like maybe once every couple months. So that doesn't pay for it. But one idea, if I can't find someone to sublease, is to like cut the price in half so that there's no studio nearly as affordable. And then it needs like 7 days a month to completely cover the expenses. And then when I come back into town to do business, I still have a studio. Um, so that's one of the technical things. But my business at this point really is flexible on location, um, especially since I have more video people who film that I can actually hire to do the filming side. I haven't done that
Right.
too much. I'll bring others into shoots with me, but I have enough people I trust that I could actually send teams and not have to be there anymore. So that's allowing me to still keep clients and past clients when they come to me, be like, yeah, what's the project? And I can still manage, do the editing in house and either come when I'm here to film or send a team out. So the plan is to still keep that, but figure out how can I push, the golf brand from all my calculations has a much higher potential to scale and has a much greater opportunity for exit in 3 to 5 years. And that potential exit would lead to much higher liquidity and even more options for not only doing things for us, but having a greater impact on serving and giving others.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. I was like, yeah, having been at the studio and it's like, man, that's a lot of logistical challenges. But that's cool to hear that's at least potentially sortable or figure outable. Do you have any, are there any ideas that starting golf brand, serial entrepreneur videos, are there any things in the spaces that you're in that you're like, man, I wish someone would start that business or that you looked into other than this golf brand? Because some of the
Yeah.
things that come to mind just between you and I, it's like, there's obviously a bunch of AI stuff with video and
Mhm.
podcasts and audio. And I think there's like a lot of great individual tools. And I think we're all waiting for that one where it's like, oh, my job no longer exists. I'll just run it through the AI. And
Mm.
I haven't seen anything even remotely close to good enough for that yet. But
Yeah.
use that or not for jumping off point. But I'm curious if you got a couple of ideas
Yeah.
we can give people.
Yeah. The AI side is not a part of it. I literally just shared a video on LinkedIn today. First one I've done in a while of me creating content that was all about humanizing your brand. And I was saying you need to focus on connection over content. Um, and so like with AI right now, I think it's going to be very easy to create content at scale, but it won't necessarily lead to true human connection. And
Mhm.
that's not a great benefit for both businesses and humanity. Um, so while there are some AI tools that I utilize, I am not eager to create something that makes AI more and more prevalent. Not out of fear of losing a job, just for personal lack of interest.
Yeah,
Um,
I hear that.
some of the so I come up with ideas all the time, and I need to do a better job of like writing them down and then writing the date that I thought of it and just looking back over time, like when was that idea first come out? So obviously I mentioned that family YouTube channel. Um, the one that's like kind of boring, but I think could be interesting is around film permits. So, like in the video production space, like especially like in LA or any big city, they typically have like film permits for going to film in public spaces. And LA takes it to a whole new level. Like they have so many different criteria. Well, video is too easy to create now. Like everyone has a camera in their pocket. And so defining what constitutes a permit, even having everyone who makes videos and content in general knowing that you need a permit, like that is a challenge at itself. And I don't think that it's realistic for, let's say, I'm making a short YouTube video down at the beach of me talking about the ocean, whatever. I don't think it's realistic for me to schedule the date 2 weeks in advance that I'm going to go create this video, that I'm going to pay 100 to $500 to go create this YouTube video that's not going to make 100 to $500. Like there's too many logistical things that don't make sense in our current economy. The film permit stuff was designed based off Hollywood production and designed on large scale production because the idea of creating your own production company 20 years ago, it was not easy to accomplish. Now, anyone who has a camera can say they're a video production company. And so the idea was like, what if someone could create an app and an integrated platform for film permits that was very dumbed down and made it very easy for people to do it legally? Because truthfully, everyone wants to do things. Let me take that back. Not everyone wants to do things legally or above board. I would say the average person wants to do the right thing, right? But if you make it so stinking hard to do the right thing, then more and more people are going to do it either out of ignorance or just because it's too complicated and it won't work. And so, if there could be an app and a connected system that a bunch of municipalities got on board with, and that it's just everyone is in the same app. If you're creating a YouTube video and let's say your subscriber count's less than 1,000 subscribers, like it's $5 and you can do it that day, right? Uh, it's easily scalable. So, like, if you need police to be on site and you need to shut down roads and you need like all these safety precautions, obviously you need the proper permitting path. And that could be within it as well. But like, I'll pay $5 on an app to film a video today to know that I'm doing it right and that no one's going to be upset. But $500 to go film a quick YouTube video for something that's not technically making money, there's no way. Um, and so that was one where I'm like, if someone could figure that out and actually get municipalities to get on board and sort of systematize it, and then find a way to actually get that out to the video world, they would make way more money for the cities than they are now. And as a business standpoint, you could find a way, like whether it's a monthly or whether it's a percentage of every permit, that the platform then just makes its money as it scales as well. So that's one of those ones that I won't likely do anything with, because it would take a lot to get it going. But if it got going, it would go well. One that I'm curious about that I might do, um, and this is YouTube related as well, is because I have some buffer, I was like, what if, and this could literally be my video production YouTube channel where I teach people about video. What if I started going to all sorts of different kind of businesses and doing free videos? So this could be a small business, like a coffee shop. This could be a tire business. This could be, a commercial construction company. This could be Google. Like, it could be any level and scale, and hopefully all of them. What if every week I was creating videos for different kinds of businesses for free? And each one starts with sort of like a video podcast where I sit down with them and really dive into the nitty gritty of their business. You know, what does your business look like? What are your core challenges? What are your current goals? What would success look like this year? Things that I already do with my clients, right? And then start diving through and analyzing, like, hey, for this coffee shop, if they were to add $200 in revenue every single day, that equates to, I don't know, let's say it's $70,000 in a year. I'm totally making the math up. Um, I honestly think that's close though. Uh, and you go like, what would you be willing to invest to get 70,000 extra a year? And they're like, well, I haven't thought about that, but probably, let's say $7,000 or $10,000. Now, typically, and comes from some learning that I've done about value-based marketing. Typically, to solve a problem and have a proportional solution, you're looking at somewhere between a 10 and 30% of the goal to achieve that. So 7 to 10,000 would be super reasonable to accomplish that. So if I start going and having these conversations with all these different businesses, sharing those conversations in long form, then go and create videos that actually bring value for free and give them strategy, and then follow up, see how that does, and just start equipping video people at scale with understanding of how to actually bring value to different types of companies. That will provide a lot of growth for our channel. It allows us to potentially do some one-on-one coaching if we want to do that, or courses that are more at scale. And I only want to do that if I feel like I could bring an extreme amount of value. Um, for us moving to a new location, it would actually allow us to meet and build relationships with people quickly. And I'm doing something of such high value for them for free that it just builds a lot of social equity. And then potentially these projects that I'm doing for free are leading to paid projects that I can hire the teams to fulfill, but I'm not necessarily fulfilling myself. So that's one of my like sort of crazy ideas that I'm tempted to try.
Yeah, I love that one.
But there's a bunch of ideas like that where it's like tangential to what I already am gifted in,
Yeah.
but in a new lane that could be more profitable.
Yeah, that's why I love hearing other people's ideas, because I'm like, I know what I think about all the time, but I didn't even know that there were like film permits. And it
Yeah.
actually reminds me, a friend of mine showed me this app that he was using for his drone, and he's a
Yeah.
photographer actually. And he's
Okay.
like, I had to download this app, which I can zoom in and I can see, do I need a permit this day? Can I fly above a certain footage? And it
Yeah.
was just this app. And I'm like, oh, that's a super niche app. And
Yeah.
I bet it does well because it's got all this like sticky data from governments,
Yep.
and you've got to use it. Like there's no other way to find this out. So yeah, I love stuff like that. And just anything around what you do. Cause as I'm getting into this podcasting thing, I'm seeing all these new little things that I'm like, "Oh, that's kinda useful." Like, I used one the other day that was like, "Look, if you don't have time for making, timestamp show notes, throw this in here, and we'll just spit out, like, 10 show notes or something like that, or 10 timestamps." And we do that manually just because it's cleaner, better, and, more professional than most other podcast editing companies, which are now, like, AI based, I think.
Yeah.
But I used that and I was like, "Never would've thought about this unless I was in this industry." So I think for
Yeah.
me, the most exciting part of all this is like, tell me the secrets of the industry. I want to know all of them. So,
Yeah.
okay, man. One of the things I've noticed already about the people I've talked to, it's like, oh yeah, I've got my main business, and then like I don't really do anything else except for these other like 8 things. And that's
Yeah.
been a very common theme,
Yep.
as well as the theme that everyone I've talked to so far has been very quick to jump when they feel God say jump. Just in terms of
Mhm.
like the entrepreneurial side of this right now, I'm noticing a lot of people are willing to take big risks, like leaving, like going there, like finding a job, like all those things, or even just being an entrepreneur. Like I think that's just part and parcel of what we're doing here. So, um, can you give us links? Where can we find you? All that kind of stuff that you just talked about. I'll throw them in the show notes. But where would you like people to find you?
Yeah. Yeah. Our production company is Larimore Production Company. And we just have larimore.co as our website. Um, our golf brand is the website is live. So if this goes out before the brand is actually fully launched, you can still go on there and order stuff. But that's verb golf, like adjective verb. Um, and so, and our tagline is golf is a verb. Um, but yeah, those are the two primary places. And then if you want to add to our 51 subscribers for the family YouTube channel, that's good, not growing yet, and want to see that video about us leaving California, um, that is Excursion Family. Um, but yeah, I was stoked
Sweet.
to be able to talk through this with you, and
Yeah, thank you for
uh,
joining me on
we're-
this. It's not even like a real thing, and it's just like let's try it. It's an experiment, and so this is building in public to a tiny degree, which is like here's a podcast. I don't even know what we're doing, and yet this was really good conversation. I really appreciate that, because this is some of the stuff I know, some of the stuff I don't, and I just feel like this was at least useful for me. And if that's good enough, then no one else listens. I'm good. So thank you, Greg. I really appreciate this, man.
yeah, thank you.